as people come in, we're going to get started. Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for attending the Conference and Career Fair. We hope that you had a great time so far. My name is Claire Casella, and I am the Senior Manager of Strategy Execution here at Equal Justice Works. Today's session is titled Protecting Transgender Individuals and Communities, Legal Advocacy and Policy Solutions. If you'd like to enable closed captioning on your screen, please click the closed captioning option at the bottom taskbar. If you have any questions or comments for our panelists during the session, please type them into the Pathable chat feature. That's where you've been seeing my messages so far. Our panelists will answer these questions towards the end of the session. The session will run from 10 to 11. If you have to leave during part of the session, you can always rejoin by clicking on the name of the session under the event agenda. The session will be recorded. If you're unable to rejoin, or you will be able to listen at a later date. We are recording this session so that other attendees may also learn from our incredible experts. The recording will not be used for any other purposes. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and our moderator, Lynly, Taylor, Ashe, Jennifer, and Corey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are all super excited about this panel. My name is Lynly Egyes. I am the legal director at Transgender Law Center, and I will be moderating this panel. Due to some technical issues, we're going to be taking ourselves off video when we are not speaking. Also, this will allow for our interpreter, Laura, her screen to be a little bit bigger. So if you stop seeing us for a minute, that's why. We're going to start right now with just introducing ourselves, the organization we work with, and just a little bit about who we are and what we do. I'm going to start because my video is on. So as I said, my name is Lynly Egyes, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the legal director at the Transgender Law Center. The Transgender Law Center is the largest trans-led national organization fighting for self-determination for all people. We do what we need to do to keep transgender people alive, thriving, and fighting for liberation. We do a mix of all different types of work, including community organizing, impact litigation, legal services connected to our help desk, as well as a lot around campaign work and policy work. I'll talk a little bit more about my work later on, but I'm going to pass it over to Taylor now so she can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Taylor Brown. I am a staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union, and I work in the LGBT and HIV project. The ACLU is a large organization. We have a bunch of projects, but my project is devoted to the recognition of full civil rights for LGBT people and people living with HIV. So I primarily, these days, am stuck in litigation. And so we do impact litigation, which is kind of fun and kind of not, but I'll talk to you all about that later as well. But yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to speaking.
Thank you so much, Taylor. We're going to move on to Jennifer.
I think you're on mute. Sorry, is that better? Apologize. Someone tell me, I hope it is. You're good. Okay, good. Thank you, thank you. My apologies to everyone. This is probably a reflection of the fact that I am, as I mentioned, well, I'll say it again. I'm Jennifer Levi, and I am the director of the Transgender Rights Project of GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, otherwise known as GLAAD. GLAAD is a nonprofit law firm that's been in existence for over 40 years, and our mission is to end discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and also to end discrimination for people with HIV/AIDS. I have been I've been at GLAAD for over 20 years and have had the incredible opportunity in that time period to see some tremendous advances for the protection in advancing protections for transgender people, as well as some setbacks. So I'm excited to be on the panel today, and look forward to hearing from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're going to pass it on to Corey.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Corey Prachniak-Rincón, they, them, theirs. I am currently the Senior Advisor on Public Health at the International Association of Providers of AIDS Care, or IAPAC. I've only been there for about a month now, so a lot of what I'll be speaking to is kind of my experience leading up to here, since so far, I haven't had a ton of experience in this position. Prior to doing this for 3 years, I was leading a state agency here in Massachusetts where I live that focuses on LGBTQ youth specifically. And my background, in addition to doing, I got my MPH a few years ago and did some international research on sexual health and human rights. And prior to that, I was working for several years in DC on LGBTQ rights, and mostly focused around the health sphere. And during that time, I did an Equal Justice Works project for a couple of years. So I'm very excited to be back in the Equal Justice Works space and to be speaking to you all today. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Corey. And last but certainly not least, Ashe.
Hello. Can you hear me? Great. Awesome. Sorry, I was having some audio too issues. So my name is Ashe McGovern. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm the Senior LGBTQ Policy Advisor in the New York City Mayor's Office. And I'm also the Executive Director of the NYC Unity Project, which is our first mayoral citywide LGBTQ office and project. And I'm so excited to be here today. I was an Equal Justice Works Fellow in 2013. So I've sort of had a lot of different experience in the legal field and LGBTQ rights. So I started out doing legal services with my Equal Justice Works Fellowship at New York Legal Assistance Group in their LGBTQ project, so direct legal services there. And then I really transitioned more into policy work, which is what I do now, working at the Center for American Progress in Columbia Law School and now in the Mayor's Office in New York City. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about fellowship trajectory, career path, and LGBTQ, and specifically trans and non-binary rights. So thanks for having me on the panel.
Thanks so much, Ashe. And what we're going to do is we have a whole bunch of questions that we've put together that different panelists are going to answer. Some of it is going to be about what's going on with trans rights right now in the United States connected to the pandemic. Some of them are connected to prison work. But a lot of our questions will focus on our careers, how we got to where we are. Some of us here are Equal Justice Works fellows or had fellowships in the past. Some of us applied for them and didn't get them, and we are still here too. So it's really important to know that, whatever path you end up taking will hopefully get to you to where you want, even if it's not what you expected. My path certainly wasn't what I expected. I started after I left law school, I started at the Sex Workers Project. Never thought I would end up at the Sex Workers Project, but was there for almost 8 years and then came to TLC. So we're going to talk a little bit more about our paths towards the end of this presentation. But to start us out, Corey, what has the pandemic revealed about the status of trans rights in the US and has it had any impact?
Yeah, so I think, we've learned a lot of, I think, about kind of the fragility of human rights movements in the US during this time period. It was really interesting to see, I think a lot of people, as well as the media, kind of waking up to the idea of social determinants of health and the fact that we can't, expect people to be staying home if they don't have a home. A lot of the issues that come with accessing healthcare. I think that there's so much that we still have not discussed that's relevant to trans health specifically. Things like health literacy, where I think that's a huge part of the problem in the pandemic, and people not being able to or willing to follow public health guidance. And when we think about, populations such as trans folks who need specific information and who need safety in the spaces where they're receiving information, whether that's in the schools where I've done a lot of work, or whether that's, moving throughout their lives. That, we just have terrible health literacy in this country. And that all of these kind of underlying socio-political, socioeconomic issues really come into play when we have an emergency like this, but it's really shining light on a lot of things that were already happening. With all of that said, I think that we have some particular issues and opportunities that are coming out of this for trans folks. I think one opportunity that we see is expansion of telehealth, which largely is a kind of a legal policy issue, because it's not that people didn't know before how to have a Zoom call. It's that telemedicine is really limited in terms of its insurance coverage depending on state law, and that's something that state policymakers can change and allow people, particularly trans people in rural areas, to be able to access healthcare that they've been excluded from up until now. So I think that's one area where we're seeing an expansion. Same thing with just healthcare access in general and different innovations around things like at-home testing for HIV. That's something that I'm working on a lot now, which obviously benefits everyone, but we know that trans folks are particularly at risk and need access to those kinds of services. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities. I also think that there's, we run the risk now of a pushback of funding being cut for different services, different programs that have been happening around, we've seen a lot of movement on key issues like homelessness and ending the HIV epidemic. And I think we face the possibility of rollbacks in a lot of those things as state budgets and the federal budget are going to be facing huge deficits as a result of the economic impact. So I think it's something that we all have to stay really vigilant and ready for, because it's one thing to have rights on paper, but all of these issues around budgeting and financing and actually access to health and to services are where people's lives are impacted, I think, more than just having a right on paper. We need money for these things.
Thank you so much, Corey. Jennifer, do you have anything you want to add about what the pandemic has revealed about the status of trans rights in the US? You're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. It's absolutely exposed the vulnerabilities of the community. And, we saw some really important efforts right at the outset, though, to coordinate across interests with other organizations and other movements. Certainly the vulnerability of people, LGBTQ people and others and everyone who are incarcerated was, something that Massachusetts, for example, there was a lot of coordination to seek release of people who are vulnerable, and which was everybody, but also with people with particular health issues and health concerns. And there were certainly some successes in that regard, lots more to do. Certainly in terms of people who have housing insecurity, we have seen very significant reduction in opportunities for shelter. It's also just really exacerbated some of the tensions and the challenges for working with those providers and making sure that there's sufficient education to ensure safe access for transgender people. And of course, unfortunately, even throughout the epidemic, we've seen proposals of rollbacks of federal protections, including rollbacks of non-discrimination provisions in the Affordable Care Act, and more recently, Housing and Urban Development HUD proposing a rule that would reverse protections under the Equal Access Act. And I could really go on, but it has just very much exposed the vulnerabilities that people experience and really increased the challenges for advocacy. But I also agree with Corey, it's created some real opportunities and some real connections. And I think that, I remain hopeful, but I also just want to encourage folks to remember that there's an election coming up, and elections matter a lot.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And you raised people inside prisons and jails. Taylor, could you talk a little bit about the work that you've done around advocacy for queer people in prisons?
Absolutely. So much of my work has been focused in the trans rights space. So that's sort of what I can speak from. Before my time at the ACLU, I've been at the ACLU since March, right when we went remote for the pandemic. So I never actually made it in office aside from moving my boxes. Before that, I was at an organization called Lambda Legal, which is another LGBT and HIV civil rights organization that does primarily impact litigation, policy, and public education. But I've done a variety of things. I think one of the things that really stands out to me is an organization that Lynly could tell you a lot about. It's called SONG, Southerners on New Ground. I'm a Southerner. I'm from North Carolina originally. And SONG was doing a program called Bail Out Black Mamas. A lot of people were in jail for being poor, basically. They could not pay the fee to get out. And so ultimately they were just sitting in jail, losing their jobs, losing their housing. And so this was sort of a grassroots fundraising effort to pay people's bail fees so they could get out of jail. And so being an attorney, that allows you to pretty much visit your client any time of the day that you want. And so I had the privilege meeting Black trans women, going into the jail, discussing the program with them, and then ultimately arranging for them to be their fees to be paid and for them to be released. I just recently filed with a team of other attorneys, but we have a case now in the Southern District of Illinois. This is on behalf of a transgender woman who has been denied medically necessary health care. She is housed in a men's facility, and she has been subjected to some of the worst experiences that our horrible carceral system imposes on people. And so that includes rape, that includes physical violence from prison staff and from other incarcerated folk. And we're also challenging the Trump administration's transgender offender manual, which is just a ridiculous sort of, again, another attack on transgender people from this administration around how transgender people are housed, how they're classified, and setting up all of these arbitrary hurdles for people who are in the most vulnerable of circumstances already, being in state custody, but also people who, again, are just, as we know from the letters that all of our organizations get and just the stats that we know, are being subjected to some of the most horrible experiences. I have also done, I did an amicus brief in an ACLU case that came out of Florida while I was at Lambda Legal called Cohane. This was about the right to social transition while you are in state custody or federal custody. Unfortunately, the 11th Circuit, was not very friendly to that case. But there are so many issues that are, again, largely centered around healthcare and the violence that transgender people experience that a lot of our organizations have. TLC does amazing work. I'm GLAAD does amazing work. And so I know there are tons of cases out there, but unfortunately, I think that, whenever we're challenging these kinds of things, it's one of the most difficult areas of the law, because we just have such a racist, transphobic criminal justice system. And I hate criminal justice system. Like, I think it's, again, carceral system, the police state. But I think sort of the upside is that we're truly, people just need advocates. And, all of my clients have been amazing people who have led amazing lives and who will lead amazing lives once they're released.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I know that at TLC, we also do a lot of work, as you mentioned, in prisons and jails, and the experiences of transgender people in prisons and jails, specifically transgender people of color, is absolutely horrific. And I'm so happy you are doing that amazing work. We're going to shift a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about a different form of legal work, or where your JD can take you. And I'm going to pass this off to Ashe. Ashe, why have you chosen to do policy work, and how did you get into government work? And is this different from the previous work you did in legal services or academia?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yes, it is very different. So as I mentioned, I had an Equal Justice Works Fellowship after law school, did some legal services for LGBTQ folks. And what that looked like mostly was helping people with healthcare denials, workplace discrimination, sort of like a really broad range of things, but helping individual clients remedy the issues that they were experiencing. And one thing that I was exposed to in my fellowship that I figured out I really liked was policy work. and sort of more collective legislative advocacy, right? So at the time, we were working on what's now called IDNYC, which is our municipal ID, and figuring out how to make it as trans inclusive as possible. And through that process, I testified at city council, I worked with coalitions of people, talked to people who were directly impacted by the issues, including myself, and helped create legislation that had a really broad impact on many people. And I figured out that I really liked doing that, and that while I loved my individual clients very much in legal services, I often saw them coming back and coming back and coming back because, as others on this call have mentioned, the carceral system is not the only racist and transphobic and problematic institution in our country. Many, many of them are. And so whether it was in the healthcare context or people trying to get workplace or housing rights remedied, rights on paper don't always translate into justice in people's lived realities and experiences. So I transitioned into doing policy work because it felt like I would have a broader impact on people's lives and maybe a more permanent impact on people's lives. And so after that fellowship, I went to Washington, D.C. and worked at the Center for American Progress, and got to do a lot of cool and interesting federal advocacy work related to legislation and budgeting and building sort of federal interagency partnerships in order to get more money for queer and trans people. And I really found that to be exciting work. And in doing it, I was working a lot with people who were government workers. And it felt like the best way to learn more about how to be an effective advocate for my communities was to actually go into government work, see what government work looks like, and take lessons from that work and apply it to sort of the activism and advocacy that I was doing for my communities. So that's what I've done, and I've been in government for about 3 years. And I really appreciate what Corey said earlier, which is that it's one thing to have our rights on paper. It's another thing to have programs and services and money that actually reflect our needs, and building programs and services that are affirming and supportive and give us the things that we need, whether it's healthcare or housing or shelter or jobs. Like that's a really important component. And I don't think in the LGBTQ legal sphere we talk enough about, particularly as a racial and economic justice imperative, doing government fiscal advocacy and getting money and services and programs for people who are most marginalized in our communities. And that's what I've tried to do in the government work that I'm doing currently, and hope to continue to share sort of what I've learned with others through coalitions, through partnerships. And that's sort of been an important part of what I've done. But I do want to make just a little plug for people, whether you're working in government or you're not working in government, to really do that type of budget and program advocacy, particularly around anti-poverty programs. And to realize that there are lots of, even if there are not formal offices like the ones that I lead in New York City, there are often people who are queer or trans or queer and trans affirming in city agencies, and figuring out how to connect with them, or politicians, and figuring out how to connect with them and advocate for budget changes and programs and services can be a really powerful way to make a significant impact on people's lives. So that's a little bit about some of the government work that I've done. And I'm happy to answer more questions if people have them.
Thank you so much, Ashe. As a New Yorker, I benefited from the New York City municipal IDs, which I greatly appreciated, as did so many New Yorkers. Has huge benefits. The ability to have an ID, no matter what someone's status is huge. So big thank you for all the work you did on that. We're going to shift and talk a little bit about our everyday jobs and what we do and what we like and what we don't like. So I'm going to pass it to Taylor first. Could you tell us a little bit about your least favorite aspect of your job, and what's your favorite aspect of your job? and you're on mute.
Okay, just kidding. So I'm back. Least favorite, and so I don't know why I'm acting surprised that this is the question, but so I would say we'll start with the least favorite. So this is sort of a universal critique. I always seem to be coming from a place of critique, which I relish, but I would say that our movement and our organizations, especially in the LGBT rights space, but being at the ACLU and getting to see some of the other projects who work on other issue areas, I can say that, this is a universal problem. But as our movement is growing, everything that's going on in this country right now in terms of racial justice and all of the things that are tied into racial justice, socioeconomic justice, housing, healthcare, all of these things, our movement has not been the best at as employers. And so I think that as people who have the background that I do, who are similar to me, who look like me, who don't look like me, come into this movement and do the work that needs to be done, there has been growing pains for sure. And I think that we still have a very long way to go to do right by people of color in our movement who are, not only the communities we're serving, but who are also employees, trans people. And those are things that I am, constantly taking to people to task over, but it's very, very important. And so I would say that's probably the least favorite part of my job, but also I think a very, very necessary part of my job. I think that, we have to hold ourselves accountable to the values and the mission that we profess to the world, and where we don't, I'm going to sue you. Kidding, kidding. No, I'm going to work with you to come to a solution. I would say the most favorite part of my job is, I always describe it, not necessarily that I feel like a superhero, but I get to take on bad guys who are treating people in the worst way because of literally who they are. And just, it's just so fun to me. I think, again, it's just, we're coming to a time now, I'm so happy to be on this panel with people like Ashe. I should say one of my favorite professors from law school, she would always say, if you want to change the world, run for office, run for office, run for office. It is so important for us to be in government. And I think I want you all to seriously consider any kind of government career, and especially running for office. I think it is so, so, so important. But again, it's just very funny whenever now, my first case that I ever led on my own was a case called Cadle v. Falwell, and it was suing my home state and my alma mater, UNC, for their exclusion of transition-related healthcare for state employees and their children and spouses. And when I met with the Attorney General's office, who was defending a portion of the case, the universities, it just is so funny to me and so tickling that they have to sit across the table from a trans woman, a biracial Black trans woman, and you have to explain to me why you're discriminating. That's just something I don't think they've ever had to face in the past. It's always been primarily people who look like them, who come from their experiences, and again, it's not going to really, really, really dig into you for what you're doing and the harms that you're causing. And so that is particularly fun for me. I do enjoy that. And of course, just knowing that at the end of the day, when I go to bed at night, I'm making this world a better place and I'm helping people. And I think that is probably sort of the best feeling in the world. It sucks, it's hard, especially these last 4 years with this administration. But at the end of the day, again, I have that feeling. I work with wonderful people. I get to meet wonderful people, and I love that.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Jennifer, what's your favorite aspect and least favorite aspect of your work?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm so inspired by the other panelists, and I really love to hear about the opportunities that folks coming into the movement have had and really been able to build out. So I'm inspired by so much of what I've heard here. In terms of the least favorite, it's hard at the moment to look beyond the circumstances that we're in and the reliance on technology at the moment. is very challenging, and the idea that people can really be limited by the resources that they have and unable to make the connections that I think people really need to do the work and to be able to advance or take advantage or leverage the protections that are out there is really frustrating. And I think the isolation that people are experiencing is really challenging, and I think it's going to have really very serious consequences for the community. And so that's my least favorite part at the moment. But honestly, I feel so fortunate to have had the professional path that I have, and really my favorite part of the work is seeing the hope that I can bring sometimes through the advocacy that I do. And I just have a quick story about a young transgender guy that I had the opportunity to represent. He was just starting into athletics at a young age. I think he was like 5 or 6 years old, and he wanted to play with the local Little League team, and he needed his birth certificate changed because they needed to confirm his age. It really didn't have anything to do with anyone questioning who he was or his identity as a transgender boy. And it at the time required a lot of steps to go through and doing some, untying some knots. But at the end, we got him a birth certificate that reflected his male identity, and he signed up for Little League, and he sent me a video that I could just see, on his face how impactful it had been to really open up those doors and give him those opportunities, but also to provide his family with the resources that they would need to advocate for him as he got older. And then, it's been exciting to be part of work that I've done for as long as I have, to see young people who I've worked with really, flourish and grow because of some basic support that they received early on in their lives. And I'll just tell one other quick story, which also was a highlight of mine professionally, and that was that I had the opportunity to advocate for a transgender woman who was wrongly held in Massachusetts Department of Corrections facility, in the men's facility. And, we brought a claim on her behalf under the Americans with Disabilities Act, arguing that a number of things, but including the fact that she needed to be transferred to the women's facility. And it was at a time when no transgender woman had been rightly placed in the women's facility. And I worked with her over the years, and eventually she was transferred and then released, and had the opportunity to continue to work with her as she transitioned to the community. And, just to see the kind of change that's possible really gives me hope for the future, including in really challenging times. And also hearing from newer lawyers and law students about the change that they want to see, that I think we really need to bring to the work, is incredible. Is an incredible inspiration to me. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I remember that case with the woman who was incarcerated. Amazing work, and that was great that she has now been released and that she was eventually housed in the correct place. But the fact that she was eventually released is the best part of that. So Thank you for your work there. I'm going to pass this question on to Ashe. What is your least favorite aspect of your job and your favorite aspect of your job?
Yeah, so I would say definitely my least favorite aspect, and I think other people in politics and government work can probably relate to this, is, government that's a pretty large term. There are plenty of institutions that sort of fall under that umbrella of government that are not institutions that I feel aligned with or happy about being connected to. And also sort of the political figures that some of us work for, we don't always agree with. And so one example of that for me is definitely, I have been a strong critic of the NYPD and the Department of Correction, which exist in New York City. And that criticism and that critique has not always been as present with the person that I work for. So I've been both publicly and privately critical of the mayor and of people who work in institutions who, at least in sort of this umbrella government concept, work for the same systems that I do. So I think that can be a challenge. And I think also in government work, what is both a challenge and a positive is that, as a policy advocate and as a legal services advocate, I was often advocating to the government to make changes, to implement changes, sharing sort of broader ideas and concepts about what I thought programs or services should exist, or policies or legislation that should exist. And one of the challenges, but also the most exciting parts of my job, is sort of that the buck stops on this side, right? Like it stops when advocates and community members are saying very clearly, like, this doesn't work and it needs to change. Part of my job is to figure out how to make it change and how to make it effectively change and implement that change in a way that's actually impactful and positive for community members. So I think that can be a challenge, and it can also be one of the better parts of my job, but definitely having to work in an institution that is actually many institutions and sort of a massive infrastructure is a challenge, but it's also can be really exciting. I've gotten an opportunity to learn about a lot of different areas, including housing and homelessness policy and workplace policies and healthcare policies and programs and services and grants, and just like a million things that I feel like in these 3 years has actually been like 10 years of knowledge. So it's both a challenge because it's so massive, but it's a really exciting opportunity too, because there's so much to learn and to know and to advocate for internally.
Thank you so much, Ashe. And Corey, what's your least favorite aspect of your work and your favorite aspect of your work?
Yeah, so I wasn't looking forward to this question. I don't like to speak about negative stuff, but I will accept the bait. So I think, I've been in this movement now for 12 years, and I think that there's been a huge shift just professionally in that time, from this being, basically a huge limitation on your career and what you could expect to do when I started, to today being really lucrative. And when I started working in LGBTQ rights, I realized over the few months after I started this, as I saw a lot of other doors closing for me, that my career became very centered very quickly, because no one else wanted to work with me. And so that was, one of the reasons I was really thankful to Equal Justice Works for giving me a project, because I felt like otherwise it was going to not be easy for me to kick off my career. And since then, I think today, working in LGBTQ rights, or just, being in any way connected to the movement, is a really great way for people to network. It's a great way for some people to make quite a bit of money. And I think that with that has come a lot of people who are here, not out of the goodness of their hearts or because they're making some kind of a sacrifice, although they like to act like they are, but they're really here for their own self-motivations. So I think that over time, it feels less like a movement and more just like a profession, which I don't like. And that's been challenging for me to deal with, especially, I try to assume good intentions about people. And I think that's partly because of how I started in this, where it really was, people who were doing this work. It was a small group of people who really were dedicated and passionate about it. And so it was easy to make that assumption. And increasingly people just don't assume good intentions, but also, you can never question theirs, or they'll come at you. So it's really become, for me at least here in Massachusetts, a very toxic environment. So that's what I dislike. What I do like is anytime I can find a chance to have some direct, immediate impact or human contact, which even before the pandemic in the policy realm, we were able to see other humans, but actually doing anything that impacted a real person is always a challenge, because when you're doing this policy work, especially before this, I was working in the state, And, if you can get something done in 3 years in state government, that's, an accomplishment. So you don't always feel the immediate impact of what you're doing. So I would seek out any opportunity I had to just feel like I was able to, do something that advanced this work, and that had a real impact in that day. So for the first 6 months of the pandemic, because of my role, I was able to help out with group homes for foster youth. I basically was working there as like a second full-time job for the first half of the first 6 months of the pandemic or so. And that for me was amazing, just to get to, I was doing all this youth work like on a policy level, and, don't actually get to see or talk to youth much at all. So just getting to actually be there working directly with youth and feel like, you have a positive impact on another person was really good. And, I always, anytime I have that opportunity in this career, is awesome, because you just don't always feel like you're really making a difference in a tangible way. So I would encourage people who are interested in pursuing policy work to make sure that you find some way of actually connecting with others, and doing something that, like, okay, no, we don't always control what's going to happen with a bill that we're working on or a program that we're working on that's going to take years to get off the ground. But if you can find some way to just really connect with someone and feel like you worked together, and maybe you help someone else, you're also feeling like that's a good thing for you, emotionally. I really encourage people who are doing this kind of long-term policy work to find those opportunities, because for me, that's my favorite part of the job, even though it's often a small part.
Thank you so much, Corey. And I'm going to take a minute just to answer this question as well. My favorite part of my job is just the fact that I get to work with amazing people, and I work at an organization that really relooks how impact litigation should be moved forward. And what that means is we look at victories very different. Our goal isn't always to get to the Supreme Court. Our goal is to be creating change and getting decisions in cases that are going to impact people's lives as quickly as possible. So some of our cases, our impact cases, are actually in immigration court, and some of them are in state court. And just being able to have that flexibility and actually focusing our cases on the real needs of transgender people and what we're hearing from community is huge. And being able to focus our casework on what we hear from our amazing programs team and what we're hearing from people on the ground. Almost all of our cases come directly from community members, and we really like to be able to shape those cases to have the biggest impact on people's lives as quickly as possible. So I think that is one of my favorite aspects of my job, because a lot of impact orgs look at victories very differently and have very different criteria for the cases that they take. So super grateful and love that about my work. One of the hardest parts of my job is right now, there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of loss in community right now, and working through that and supporting staff as much as we can is a great thing, but it's also hard during the pandemic. And in general, also engaging with people I don't always agree with, who are often opposing counsel, can take a toll sometimes when you're trying to fight them or explain or educate them. And sometimes it feels like you are hitting your head against the wall. I really loved what Taylor said when she said, and you know what, we might just sue you. And I appreciate that, because that is often my reaction when I'm like, you're not willing to talk about this, that's okay. We're just gonna sue you then. So I really appreciated that, and that really resonated with me as well. We're now going to move to our last question, and I encourage people, if they have any questions, to bring them on in. And when I say bring them on in, I really just mean put them in the Zoom chat, because this is not in person. Our last question is focusing on what is the best piece of advice you received during your career. And we're going to start that question with Ashe.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think the best piece of advice that I ever received is, and that really resonated for me pretty significantly, is to make sure you know what your days are going to look like and to feel good about what your days are going to look like. So I think probably many of the people who are on this panel and also the people who are listening to this panel are excited by the idea of potentially doing trans rights advocacy or work or some other sort of social justice work. And that can look like many different things. When I went to law school, I thought, for sure, I want to do impact litigation. I want to, work at GLAD or the ACLU or Lambda Legal. Like that felt like something that I would want to do. And then I found out when I started interning in law school in some of those places that what that day looked like was not actually, didn't fit with my skill set best and wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So for me, policy advocacy has been great because I get to work with a lot of people in person all the time. It's not in impact litigation, it feels like a little more like writing heavy. And I know that was something that I did academically when I was at Columbia Law School as well. And in policy, there's a lot of negotiation and interaction and working with community members and building coalitions. And that really is something that gets me excited and motivated every day to go to work. So I would just encourage you to, if you're thinking about a career in this field or other fields, not just going into what you think will have the biggest impact, but what you are excited by doing every day, not just the end result, but what the process would actually look like. Do you want to be writing and researching? Do you want to be working with people in coalition? Do you want to be building coalitions? Would you prefer to be doing legal services and advocating directly for individual clients and sort of often like shorter cases? So just really, that has been great advice to me. And it's really resonated for me that it's not just the end result of the work that you do that's important, but it really matters what your everyday looks like, because we all spend most of our lives and our days in these jobs. So just make sure what you're doing is fulfilling for you and has an impact for the communities that you're working with.
Thank you so much, Ashe. Taylor, could you talk to us about what the best piece of advice you received during your career?
Well, I'm probably closest to you, this audience, in class year. I graduated class of 2017. I often forget that because it feels like it's been a lifetime. But two things, I really tried to narrow this down, but I couldn't. So the first one is ask for the world. Do it. I mean, I think sometimes we often hesitate to really ask for what we need for, and we feel guilty about it and things like that, but you just have to throw that out the window. Ask for the world. Number two, I think, is do not let people confuse experience with experiences. Of course, there are lots of, you're going to come into this, especially if you come into impact litigation, there are so few young attorneys or younger attorneys in terms of their career. And so you quickly find that, of course, these people are brilliant, they're smart, they know civil procedure, they know writing styles, all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, I think that experiences are so much more valuable in this work. And as someone, I mean, experience, of course, but experiences in terms of personally, I always share my background, because right before law school, I was waitressing. I waitressed most of my way through college, along with multiple other jobs. I'm someone who, as a first generation college student, still no one else in my family has been to college, let alone law school. My dad was in prison for a good 20 years. I had navigated, before I even got to law school, I had already appealed Medicaid's denial of hormone therapy when I was in North Carolina. I had negotiated with UNC a favorable housing situation after I immediately started my transition when I got to law school. And those kinds of experiences are so important. People who come from poverty, people who have had to fight their way through these horrible systems that I'm now working in and challenging. That kind of experience, I think, is invaluable. And I don't live my life in theory. I live my life in action and reality. And so I think that is so important.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Corey, the same question to you.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm going to be piggybacking quite a bit off of what was said. But for me, I think it really came from my parents. I'm also first generation college student, and my parents really encouraged me to, find something that I was passionate about and enjoyed doing, which is funny because they certainly hadn't. They just kind of took the first jobs they could get out of high school and stuck with it, and so had everyone else in my family. So I didn't really have any examples of that, and I don't think I would have even thought to do that had they not encouraged me. But at the same time, I think I benefited a lot from growing up in a working class family where people, like most people in this world, are not working because they enjoy something. They're working because they need to have a job or else they will die. And so keeping in mind on the bad days that, I'm really privileged to be here and to have a job that I very often enjoy. So when occasionally it is just, I have to get through something that I'm not enjoying, to remember that that's what most people do, 40 plus hours a week and in often terrible conditions, especially, around the world in lower income countries. So I think trying to keep both of those in mind, that, that do something that you're passionate about, but also, remember that you're lucky to have a job doing something that you often enjoy. And basically that's helped me to kind of calm down sometimes when, it's not always a day at the beach. So.
Thank you so much, Corey. Jennifer.
Let's see. I guess I think about some of the advice I got that has really helped me develop as a lawyer. And one of those is really to try, when you're working, particularly on the most challenging issues, to really open and stretch your mind to embrace and really fully understand what the other side is arguing in a particular case or around a particular piece of legislation or advocacy. And it's really when you actually can convince yourself and fully understand what is both like at the heart of and motivating someone who disagrees with you, that I think you can most fully develop responses to that. And that's been really helpful and important to me. And I guess connected to that, I would say be willing to change your mind, be willing to recognize that your views can change, but also the law and the social and cultural context can change. And so stay open to changing your views and your thoughts. And then the last thing I'll say on the professional development side is to find people with whom you can be vulnerable and really talk about some of the challenges you're facing, some of the things that you really may want to work on, and find kind of partners in crime who you enjoy working with, who can particularly in some of the most challenging times, just kind of laugh with you, reflect back some of your own foibles, and build those relationships and sustain them over time.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm going to answer this one as well. The best piece of advice I got in my legal career was from a dear friend of mine, also a mentor and a colleague who passed during the pandemic. She taught me many things. One of them was, when you're doing this work, and at that time I was doing a lot more direct service work with the trans Latinx community, it was show up and follow through what you are going to do. If you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. And because oftentimes attorneys claim they're going to do a lot of different things and then just don't do it. And the second piece of advice that she didn't say to me, but she showed me, was that it's really important to listen to the needs of community, whether or not you're part of that community, but the community you are trying to work with or work within or work alongside of, know the issues and the legal issues and the other types of policy issues that need to be addressed. As lawyers, we often do not know those things, and we often make decisions because it's what we think is best rather than what community members are actually telling us. Sometimes we want to bring that big legal case, or we want to do a huge training that we think is going to be effective, but it actually could be harmful to the communities that we are claiming to work within or working alongside of. So really listening and not assuming that as attorneys, we know what work needs to happen. And that was from Lorena Borjas. We have one question, so thank you so much. And I'm going to open it up to whoever in the group would like to answer with our 2 minutes left. To get involved in this work, would it be better to work with a big org like the ACLU or a small org with just a few people?
Look, I think what Ashe said is really so important, which is get a sense of what your day-to-day might look like in any of the kind of range of organizations or government agencies that are out there, and try to think about what will fit with your interests and your style, and go in that direction. I think this panel and so many others kind of show there's just a lot of different ways to get into the work. And I would say the most important thing is to try to persist in your connection to the work that you ultimately want to do, even if that's where you don't find yourself initially, professionally.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Is there one other person who wants to answer this question? Maybe Ashe, because I see that your screen is open.
I creepily popped up on my video. Yeah, I just sort of like building on what Jennifer said, in addition to, figuring out what you want your day-to-day to look like. I would say many people who are listening are probably law students. Definitely take advantage of being a law student and do different clinics, do different internships. Like, now is a really great time, even if it's not LGBTQ rights. Like, if you don't have an LGBTQ clinic or you can't get an internship at GLAD or the ACLU or the mayor's office or whatever, figuring out like different types of work for a small organization, work for a large organization, work for impact, do legal services, do policy work. Like, now is a really great time to try out all those things and figure out what resonates most for you and what lands with you best, and feels like it's going to be the most exciting, but also going to use your skills best to push forward change. Try everything. That's the only way to figure it out.
Thank you so much, Ashe. Just want to leave a little space. If Corey or Taylor, if you have anything else you want to add to this question?
Well, I would just say that I've worked at an organization with 3,000 people where the CEO was around all the time, very approachable, loved connecting with people. And I've been at small organizations where the boss could care less. So I think it matters a lot more, the culture of the org than the size.
Thank you so much. And Taylor?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I think I've worked at a medium-sized org now, and now a large org. Arguably, they're both kind of large, but yeah, I think finding your fit is key, and knowing when to leave is also key. I think that don't be scared to be there for 1 or 2 months and then say goodbye. That's kind of the situation. You have to be where your talents fit, be where the culture is right, and where you feel like you can make an impact.
Thank you so much. And I think with Taylor's words, we'll end, because they're a great way to end this panel. So thank you to all of the panelists. It was amazing to be on to share this space with you. And thank you to all of the students and participants. Big thank you to Laura. Your interpretation is wonderful. I also know that there was Spanish interpretation as well, so big thank you to our Spanish interpreter, and to Equal Justice Works for setting this up. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day today.
Thank you so much.
Bye, all, and thanks, Lynly.
And to everyone for attending. As a reminder, the recording will be up on Pathable shortly if you want to share with your peers. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Bye, everyone.
You have to hit end, Seb.